may be the greatest catch I've ever seen in my life.
Okay, you know that I say this all the time, that 99% of the news that comes out, I mean, if you hear a training camp blurb and it's going, oh my God, Joe Burrow has the strongest arm he's ever had in his entire life, you have to draft Joe Burrow. That doesn't mean anything. They're just guys trying to get retweets on Twitter. So they're at camp. They go, hey, we need to get some exposure here. They tweet out something to get people hyped up. And usually the fantasy community, at least people who don't really know how to decipher the news, they kind of take it, run with it if it confirms their biases, and they don't really know what to look for with actually important things. But we have a piece of news here that honestly is massive. I mean, it could change so much with our fantasy rankings in 2021. And that is Tarik Cohen may not be back to start this season with his torn ACL. It looks like he may have had complications. Now, the details on this are limited, and it's 100% going to have to be something that we're monitoring going into the season. But I really want to take a look at David Montgomery one more time, because we made a video earlier this offseason where I compared David Montgomery to Travis Etienne. We were going, okay, David Montgomery going at the end of the third round compared to Travis Etienne going in the middle of the fourth. We definitely prefer the value on Etienne compared to Montgomery. But now, if Cohen is not available, I mean, David Montgomery may be one of the best picks in fantasy this year. And of course, we're going to dive into all that. But first, guys, go down there, drop a like on this video. I mean, this channel continues to grow at a rapid rate, and it's because, I mean, y'all go down there and kill that like button, and I promise you, we are going to continue to get a video out every single day. And when we get closer to the season and we have in-game action, we're going to be pumping out 2 to 3 videos a day. We're going to be live streaming every single night, so make sure you're subscribed. And yeah, let's dive into David Montgomery. Okay, so with Montgomery, if you look at his ADP right now over the past 10 days in high-stakes leagues, he's currently being drafted as the running back 18. So literally dead in the middle of the running back twos. He's going directly behind Clyde Edwards-Helaire, DeAndre Swift, and J.K. Dobbins. Now that's a little bit deceiving though, because if you look at the overall ADP on those 3 running backs, Clyde Edwards-Helaire is a top 20 pick in most drafts. Then you have DeAndre Swift and J.K. Dobbins getting selected at the very beginning of the 3rd round. And then you have David Montgomery lasting until about the middle to the back half of the 3rd round. So nobody is really considering right now drafting Montgomery over Dobbins or DeAndre Swift. But right now with our rankings, and I want to be completely transparent, these are probably going to change. And that's why I've kind of been teasing y'all about our Patreon rankings, and I haven't uploaded them just yet. Now, I will say, when we get to the new studio, we're going to be moving to that studio on the 20th. We're going to be dropping our 2021 draft guide and our rankings over there on Patreon. But I've been kind of holding out just so we can wait for news like this, and I can make sure that we are going to have limited changes going forward. But right now, I may be having to change our ranking of David Montgomery, because we have him as running back 19. So technically, we're lower on him compared to consensus. And if you look at the differences in our rankings, we have DeAndre Swift and J.K. Dobbins as both running backs in tier 5. And then you drop down to tier 6, which is very similar to what you have in these high stakes redraft formats. Yet the difference is, while they're drafting David Montgomery over Chris Carson, we have Chris Carson ranked over David Montgomery for the time being. But if we get more news about Tarik Cohen not necessarily being available to start this upcoming year, I am most likely going to have to move David Montgomery up into tier 5, not only into tier 5 ahead of Chris Carson, but also, I mean, if Tarik Cohen is not ready to start the season, I could make the argument of having him jump both J.K. Dobbins and DeAndre Swift at the same time, and they're going almost a full round ahead of him right now in those high stakes redraft leagues. So yeah, David Montgomery, 100% going to be a running back that's rising for us. And at the beginning of this offseason, or at least about 2 months ago, when we just naturally assumed that since Tarik Cohen tore that ACL in week 3, that he'd be good to start this year, I was going to be probably off David Montgomery. We weren't going to be completely avoiding him. I mean, if he stayed at that ADP, we'll probably be a little bit underweight when we draft so many leagues this season, but not going to be a priority target of ours. Well, it looks like that may be changing, and I will give y'all a little peek into what we actually had in our high stakes redraft league. Y'all know over there on Patreon, we did that giveaway for the $500 fantasy league. That is a $6,000 pot. And in that league, we actually had David Montgomery go as the running back 19 at the 402. he got selected directly behind Miles Sanders, Patrick Mahomes, Terry McLaurin, Amari Cooper, and Chris Godwin. And at the 402, I didn't necessarily think that was great value at the time, but we selected DeAndre Swift at the 306. And I think if we knew this Tarik Cohen news, I most likely would have been a little bit more aggressive on David Montgomery. I don't know if we could have taken him over DeAndre Swift, given the target potential Swift has in this offense this upcoming season. But regardless, David Montgomery would have actually been in play for us there, even though we really didn't consider him at all at the time of the draft. And now I know that y'all are probably wondering, well, Mason, Tarik Cohen is a tiny running back. Why is it so important that you actually have him out of this offense for David Montgomery to rise in value? And it's because David Montgomery is just a completely different running back with and without Tarik Cohen. I mean, the difference is night and day. Where we just look at this past season, where David Montgomery in 2020 with Tarik Cohen actually averages 12.5 fantasy points per game. Now, keep in mind, guys, this is off a limited sample. I want to be completely transparent here, where, of course, if we had this season split into 8 games one direction and 8 games the other, it would be perfect. But no, this is a limited sample, as we said. I mean, this is only a 3-game sample, actually, where Tarik Cohen played. But regardless, in those 3 games, 12.5 fantasy points per game for David Montgomery, 14 carries a game, 3 targets, 86 total yards a game, and he was the running back 26 during that stretch. Now, this is significant, and I know it's a small sample, but what I want to focus in on is I want to focus in on the usage in the offense. Let's go back to 14 carries a game and 3 targets a game, because that's what we're trying to figure out here for this upcoming season. We already have a great understanding of who David Montgomery is as a running back and what he can do on a per-touch basis. We need to have an understanding of what the opportunity is going to be this upcoming year. That way, we can translate it, we can project it into direct fantasy points scored and how valuable he'll actually be. So the main reason we're bringing up that small 3-game sample and we're actually putting a lot of weight into it is if we go back to 2019, this is going to be significant because it's all 16 games by both Tarik Cohen and David Montgomery. And here you actually had David Montgomery have a very similar number to that 3-game stretch in 2020 with Tarik Cohen, almost 1-for-1 to be completely honest. Where in this stretch he had 15 carries a game, 2.1 targets a game, and 67 total yards. So I think we have a decent understanding of what David Montgomery actually looks like with Tarik Cohen. Now, we also have a great understanding of what he looks like without Tarik Cohen because he actually got to play 12 games without Tarik Cohen last year. And nothing really changed in terms of what he's getting on a yards per carry standpoint or carries per game or usage in the red zone. That all really remained constant. But the one thing that changed is the one thing that would make sense to change, and that was his usage in the receiving game. The targets drastically went up. I mean, even more than I was expecting. And what's really funny is I've been someone that, especially in dynasty leagues, I've been a lot lower on David Montgomery than most people since he came into the NFL in 2019 because we were screaming from the rooftops that Miles Sanders was a better running back, and I had no idea why people were drafting Montgomery, who was less athletic, who had less NFL draft capital, who didn't have the same type of capability in the receiving game. I didn't understand why they were drafting him over Miles Sanders. And yes, last offseason, we were taking our victory laps after Miles Sanders just completely dominated down the stretch his rookie year. But no, I mean, what's really funny is David Montgomery, we actually called him a buy low candidate after the Tarik Cohen injury because you kind of assumed that the usage was going to change. And after that injury, he turned into the running back 7 in points per game. He actually averages 17 carries a game, 6.5 targets a game. That is the number one difference maker, where he over doubles the targets per game that he had in 2020 with Tarik Cohen, and he actually triples what he had in his rookie season where Tarik Cohen played the entire year. And we know that's enough to bring you from the running back 27 in points per game to the running back 7. And that is 100% because of a PPR format and how valuable those targets are to the backfield. Because we know not only are those targets going to be converted at a high rate for running backs, but at the same time, you get the automatic point per reception. And we know that the usage in the receiving game is going to be significantly more efficient for these running backs than whatever they're getting between the tackles. And that's a main reason why we are actually going out and trying to kind of fade the running backs like a Nick Chubb, who's not getting that usage in the receiving game, because it's definitely going to cap their ceiling, where we just saw Derrick Henry run for over 2,000 rushing yards. He literally doubled damn near every other running back one. And at the same time, we go, okay, well, he still didn't finish as the top running back in fantasy. Alvin Kamara still crushed him. And it's because that usage in the receiving game is so important. And when David Montgomery was getting that, I mean, he was on fire. In the year last year, I mean, after the bye week, there was a 6-game sample. So after the bye week, a 6-game sample, that is definitely significant, where David Montgomery finished off the year in those 6 weeks as the running back 3 in points per game. He averaged over 25 points per game. The only running backs that were ahead of him were Jonathan Taylor and Derrick Henry, and he was directly ahead of both Alvin Kamara and Myles Gaskin. So David Montgomery showed that he has that elite ceiling if you do not have Tarik Cohen in that offense, because he can turn into an Ezekiel Elliott type workhorse. We've seen that upside before. Now, it's very simple to see how Tarik Cohen's going to affect this, because you look at Tarik Cohen in 2019, and like we said, I mean, him leaving the offense isn't going to open up that many more carries for David Montgomery. He actually only averages 4 carries a game in 2019, but he averages 6.5 targets a game. And that is the number one thing that we want to look at. He averages 6.5 targets a game in 2019. The year before, in 2018, he averages close to 6 targets a game again. So we know Tarik Cohen has that usage in the receiving game. If they're in a 2-minute drill, if they're in an obvious passing down scenario where they're 3 and 15, Tarik Cohen's going to come in there, and Tarik Cohen is going to take a significant amount of usage. But, I mean, if that's not the case, David Montgomery can be a 3-down bell cow running back. And a big thing that we need to look at is this offense is going to be significantly better this upcoming year. We know that they probably suffered from some of the worst quarterback play in the entire NFL the past 2 years. So where we go through and we try to evaluate David Montgomery, but I mean, he's in a dysfunctional offense. In 2020, he played 7 games with Nick Foles, 9 games with Mitchell Trubisky as the starting quarterback. And in 2019, he plays all 15 with Mitchell Trubisky and Chase Daniels for 1. So, I mean, it's ridiculous, the poor quarterback play that's been limiting this offense. And we know offensive production, offensive efficiency is going to have a massive impact on what you're expecting with those running backs and how many trips they get to the red zone, and as well, how many touches they can see per game, because you don't want those drives ending early. And now you actually have Justin Fields coming in here. And yes, if you've been following the Dynasty Football Flock in Superflex formats, I was kind of hating on the Justin Fields value when people, for whatever reason, were valuing him as a higher and a safer asset than Trey Lance when we looked historically, and that just wasn't true based on any number that you would ever look at. But in redraft leagues and what he can do for this offense this upcoming season, I love Justin Fields. I mean, right now, if you go and you look at our rankings, I know, actually, we probably shouldn't say that because they won't be available for about another 5 days or so. But we have Justin Fields considerably ahead of ADP, because we know what matters in one quarterback redraft leagues is upside, upside, upside. There will be never a reason to draft a Baker Mayfield. There's literally no explanation to draft a quarterback that at best is a streaming option, a pocket passing guy that we have seen that's going to be behind the NFL average in his passing volume per game. And if he's not picking up the rushing production, he has no fantasy upside at all. So that's why Justin Fields, we're going to be higher on compared to consensus, because if he doesn't work out, well, just cut him. It doesn't matter. Stream the position. And if you actually look at his ADP right now, I mean, ADP has Justin Fields as the quarterback 20 behind Carson Wentz, Baker Mayfield, and Trey Lance, right ahead of Daniel Jones, Tua Tagovailoa, and Ben Roethlisberger. Now, in our own rankings, we have Justin Fields as the quarterback 16, and we have him only behind Tom Brady, Trey Lance, and directly ahead of Tua Tagovailoa, and we have Deshaun Watson considerably higher than consensus, given the fact that, like we said, I mean, when you're drafting a quarterback as the quarterback 18, 19, 20 in a redraft league, you're drafting a guy that's equivalent to the streamers that are going to be on the waiver wire. So you just shoot for upside. You don't care about anything else, because at worst, you cut that player, you move on. So yes, we're going to be higher on Deshaun Watson compared to consensus, but we've already discussed that. Now, the reason we're higher on Justin Fields, and the reason I think he can help out David Montgomery in this offense, is if you look at what he did at Ohio State, I mean, he was fantastic by every number you can evaluate with. Because yes, in 2018, when he was at Georgia, he doesn't really get usage at all. Now, I will say the limited usage he does have, he actually averages over 10.0 adjusted yards per attempt, but literally he had like nothing in 2018. That's not going to be fair to evaluate him on. That's why he transferred over to Ohio State. And at Ohio State in 2019, he comes out he averages 234 passing yards a game, over 11.0 adjusted yards per attempt. Now that is massive, and that's what we are going to be looking at. And of course, it's not a perfect statistic, but we do understand that if you can place some context behind it, it is definitely one of the best ways you can evaluate the quarterback position. And alongside this, I mean, in fantasy, his last year at Ohio State, he averages almost 48 rushing yards a game, and he averages over half a rushing touchdown the past 2 years that he plays at Ohio State. So yeah, this is a quarterback that has the rushing upside. We have seen very high levels of efficiency. So I think he is a great elite upside play in fantasy. That's what we always said when we discussed Justin Fields this offseason, especially in those dynasty rookie drafts. And no, this is a redraft channel. This isn't a dynasty channel, but we've always acknowledged the fact that Justin Fields has elite upside. He can come in and he can turn into Deshaun Watson. But at the same time, why we are a little bit lower on him compared to Trey Lance is historically the team investment doesn't tie this team to him for the next 4 years as it does with the 49ers and Trey Lance. But yeah, I hope that gives a great explanation on where I currently stand on David Montgomery, where yes, we were lower on him compared to consensus, but with the Tarik Cohen news, we're going to most likely have to change that ranking. We're going to have to move him up the rankings. And yeah, Justin Fields, a quarterback with a ton of upside. So I think he actually elevates the overall potential of this offense at the same time. And I'm going to be all in on drafting Justin Fields where we can. But yeah, thank you, my dudes. I really hope y'all enjoyed this video. Go down there, drop that like, leave a comment telling me what you were doing with David Montgomery. And if you hear any news on Tarik Cohen, yeah, that's it. Subscribe. I'll see y'all with the video tomorrow. We've gotten a ton of new members joining the flock. Thank you, Grind for Gold, Devin, Bungified, Brian, Brody, Victor, Chris, Grant, Trevor, and David.